History remembers monsters in two categories: those created by hatred and those created by circumstances. The story of Anthony Salvatore Casso belongs to the second kind. He wasn't simply a criminal manufactured by greed, he was the outcome of decades of mafia tradition, street upbringing, and an environment where violence was just another language. On May 21, 1942, in South Brooklyn, the roughest streets of New York, Anthony Salvatore Casso entered the world. His parents, Michael and Margaret, were ordinary Italian Americans trying to build a modest life after migrating to the United States. Brooklyn in the 1940s wasn't polished skyscrapers, it was gang-controlled neighborhoods, organized street crime, and invisible walls that separated powerful Italian families from the rest of America. Anthony was born right in the middle of that world. From the very beginning, his life was surrounded by mafia influence. His godfather, Salvatore Calindrono, wasn't a family friend. He was a powerful capo in the Genovese crime family. When other children were baptized by priests, Anthony was baptized under the eyes of one of the most dangerous mafia groups in the country. In those days, Brooklyn was carved into criminal territories controlled by Italian mafia families: Genovese, Gambino, Bonanno, Colombo, and Lucchese. Each family protected certain streets, ports, smuggling routes, restaurants, and even construction companies. When you lived inside those borders, you didn't just grow up, you were shaped by them. Anthony wasn't born into mafia violence intentionally, but it was everywhere around him. His father, Michael, actually tried to protect him from the criminal world. He worked hard to keep Anthony away from gangster circles, but trying to stop a child in Brooklyn from noticing the mafia was like asking a fish to ignore the ocean it swims in. He grew up watching expensive cars, neighborhood thugs in silk suits, unregistered guns passed between hands at night, and street vendettas that were never punished. The idea of law meant nothing here. Fear was the real judge. By the time Anthony turned to 12, he already understood something crucial. In this world, the strongest didn't survive. The most violent did. He attended public school, but his real education was happening outside, on the streets. He saw fights almost daily. He saw loan sharks dragging men out of bars. He saw bodies disappear without funeral ceremonies. He learned names of neighborhood bosses long before he memorized the names of his teachers. And then something changed. Around the age of 15, Anthony developed an obsession: guns. He started building homemade shooting ranges on rooftops with friends. What began as a playful curiosity soon became a dangerous addiction. He practiced accuracy for hours, firing rusty pistols they purchased illegally. By 16, Anthony could hit glass bottles from 30 meters. He could dismantle a handgun in seconds. He could reload faster than most. Trained policeman. His friends were impressed, but the mafia was noticing. At 16, Anthony dropped out of school permanently. He wasn't interested in education, responsibilities, or a future job. Instead, he started hunting birds for local pigeon breeders. Yes, real mafia pigeon trainers who kept birds for gambling and racing bets. Anthony earned money by shooting hawks and owls that threatened the birds. He liked the money, he loved the danger, but most of all, he loved the power of the weapon in his hand. During that same period, Brooklyn street gangs were looking for young shooters. Organized crime needed gunmen, and Anthony's reputation spread fast. When the criminal group South Brooklyn Boys heard about him, they invited him in. The South Brooklyn Boys weren't simple street kids. They were a feeder gang that supplied new talent to New York crime families. Drug selling, extortion, assaults, and illegal gambling, they handled serious business for mafia bosses. Anthony accepted the invitation without hesitation. This single decision would act like a key turning inside a lock, opening a door to a world he would never leave again. His father was crushed. When Anthony was arrested the first time at age 16 after a violent brawl, Michael rushed to the police station. He begged, threatened, scolded, even slapped his son. trying desperately to pull him away from criminals, but it was already too late. Anthony had tasted the power of the streets. What school could give him, books, assignments, lectures, was nothing compared to the fear he could see in another man's eyes when Anthony pointed a gun at him. That feeling became his addiction. By the early 1960s, mafia families were changing rapidly. Old bosses were dying. New bosses were rising. The Lucchese family was expanding, looking for young talent. Anthony was exactly the type of street killer they wanted. Fearless, violent, and willing to do anything. A Lucchese capo named Christopher Christie Tick Furnari heard about Anthony's skills and brought him into his criminal circle. Furnari became more than just a boss. He became Anthony's gateway into mafia history. Suddenly, Anthony wasn't a street thug anymore. He was being trained, mentored, groomed. Extortion, loan sharking, murder missions, drug trafficking. Anthony entered each world with zero hesitation. His violent personality was becoming a professional weapon, and with each crime, he proved something terrifying. He enjoyed killing. He wasn't a gunman because he needed money. He was a gunman because it gave him pleasure. While other gangsters killed for business, Anthony killed for passion. He smiled during shootings. He bragged about executions. He practiced fast draw techniques like professional hitmen. Some mafia bosses believed violence was a necessary obligation. Anthony treated it like a hobby. By 20, he was already feared. By 25, he was already respected. By 30, he would become one of the most terrifying criminals in American Mafia history. But all of that was still ahead. At this stage, nobody, not even Anthony himself, could predict what kind of monster he would become. The streets of Brooklyn hadn't created a criminal. They had created a future butcher. Anthony's trouble with the streets didn't end in childhood. In truth, that was only the beginning. By the late 1950s, Brooklyn wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a training ground for predators. And Anthony Casso was slowly turning into one of them. He didn't finish school. He didn't need to. His classroom was the streets, and every block, every alley, every rooftop was part of his education. Most kids played baseball. Anthony practiced pulling a trigger. Many nights he climbed to the top of old Brooklyn buildings, aiming tin cans and rusted metal plates like moving targets. By 16, his aim wasn't impressive, it was frightening. People started whispering the same thing again and again. That kid's not afraid of anything. And the more dangerous he acted, the more dangerous people he attracted. One day, a man began watching him from a distance. Christopher Christie Tick Furnari, an important member of the Lucchese family, one of the 5 powerful mafia families that controlled New York's criminal world. Christie didn't need long to judge people. In Anthony, he saw exactly what he needed: fearlessness, violence, and a willingness to do anything if it meant survival. Christie brought Anthony close, not like a friend, more like a weapon he could sharpen. He introduced him to loan-sharking underground gambling rooms and illegal money routes that moved silently through Brooklyn's bars and restaurants. Anthony learned quickly. More importantly, he obeyed. Soon, store owners began recognizing him, not by name, but by the quiet knock on their door every Friday night. He didn't need to threaten them. Silent men with cold eyes don't need threats. People handed over cash just to make sure they never saw him again. This was the first time Anthony truly understood what power felt like. Not loud, but silent, like a gun inside a coat pocket. His parents never wanted this life. His father begged him to stop. But once the mafia decides you're valuable, there is no exit sign. In 1961, Anthony was arrested after a violent street attack. Police questioned him. Witnesses watched him from a distance, but no one identified him. Everyone suddenly forgot his face, because in Brooklyn, pointing at the wrong man meant digging your own grave. After that, the mafia trusted him even more. He was useful, reliable, scarily calm, and from those streets, a nickname was born. Gaspipe, a nickname dark enough to replace his real identity. Some say he got it because of a plumbing story. Others say it was because he preferred killing people in silence, like gas in a closed room. Either way, it fitted him perfectly. He married, tried to live a double life, tried to look normal, but normal wasn't meant for Anthony. While his children slept safely at home, he was having dinner with men who could order a murder with a glance. By 1974, the Mafia decided Anthony deserved more. They invited him to the most sacred ceremony a criminal could experience, becoming a made man. The ritual was ancient. A saint card burned in his hands, a blood oath sworn silently in the dark, a promise sealed forever. From that moment, Anthony didn't belong to his family anymore. He belonged to the Mafia. His blood, his loyalty, his identity, everything now belonged to the Lucchese Crime Family. The streets had created him, the Mafia now owned him, and the world was about to learn what a monster they had just released. By the time Anthony officially became a made member of the Lucchese Crime Family, the streets already whispered his name with caution. But inside the Mafia, another name began circling around him: Victor Amuso. To outsiders, Victor looked like another quiet Italian man in a tailored suit. But inside the world of organized crime, he was a storm waiting for its moment. He watched Anthony the same way a hunter studies a wolf: curious, calculating, and ready to use his instincts. The first time Victor and Anthony worked together, something unusual happened. They didn't need conversations. They understood each other without speaking. One was cold, one was violent. Together they became unpredictable. Every job they handled grew darker, more dangerous, more profitable. Robbery, extortion, underground businesses, almost everything illegal in New York had a shadow that somehow reached back to the two of them. Soon, Anthony stopped being just Gaspipe. He became something else, someone even senior Mafia members quietly feared. When Victor entered a room, people showed respect. But when Anthony followed behind him, people lowered their eyes. Their partnership wasn't friendship, it was strategy. Anthony became Victor's blade, and Victor became Anthony's shield. In the late 70s, the two men formed something brutally effective: the Bypass Crew, a special team for robberies, safe-cracking, jewel theft, and bank jobs. Not simple break-ins, but highly calculated operations that should have been impossible. One night, they robbed a jewelry warehouse without breaking a single lock. The police report said they must have had the keys. The truth? They had someone better: Anthony. Every month, the Bypass Crew stole millions from banks, jewelry stores, armored trucks, and nobody could touch them. Their success wasn't luck, it was Anthony. He studied alarms, watched guard rotations, learned how to dismantle locks faster than a locksmith who'd spent years training. And with every job, the Mafia's trust in him grew dangerously large. Anthony used his intelligence brutally well. If someone talked too much, disappeared. If someone questioned orders, gone. His silence kept him untouchable. By the early 1980s, Anthony had something even more valuable than money: fear. Mafia bosses respected him, street criminals feared him, police suspected him, and the public didn't even know he existed. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no loose ends. He wasn't just a killer anymore. He was a ghost wearing a suit. One night after a job, Victor said something that only Anthony could understand. "You're not made for this world anymore. You're made for the next step." Anthony never replied. He didn't need to. The night felt colder, darker, like something new was coming. Something that would change every Mafia family in New York forever. Anthony didn't just rise through the Mafia, he climbed over bodies to get there, and he was just getting started. By the early 1980s, Anthony wasn't just a soldier or an enforcer anymore. He was a weapon pointed at whoever stood in the Lucchese family's way. People inside the Mafia had begun saying something quietly behind closed doors. "If Gaspipe wants you gone, you're already dead." And then, everything changed the day Frank DeCicco from the Gambino crime family knocked on Anthony's door. Frank wasn't an ordinary mobster. He was a power broker in New York's most dangerous mafia organization. Frank and John Gotti had chosen Anthony carefully. They knew he understood violence deeper than anyone alive. Their mission? A coup, a plan to assassinate Paul Castellano, the boss of the Gambino family, a man so powerful that even the Mafia Commission treated him like royalty. Nobody was supposed to touch Castellano. The rules were clear. If you kill a boss without approval, you sign your own death certificate. But Frank and Gotti didn't care. Their ambition was bigger than their fear. They wanted the throne, and they needed someone ruthless enough to help them reach it. Anthony listened silently. No expression, no reaction. Just the cold stare that made every man uncomfortable. He finally spoke. "If you get caught, remember I warned you." Still, Anthony agreed to support the plan, carefully, quietly, without leaving fingerprints. On December 16, 1985, Paul Castellano stepped out of his limousine outside Spark Steakhouse in Manhattan, and within seconds, gunmen opened fire. Castellano dropped onto the sidewalk before he even realized he'd been betrayed. It was a killing that shook every mafia family in America. The streets of New York froze that night. Somewhere in Brooklyn, Anthony simply closed his coat and walked away. But betrayal has a price, and soon Anthony would be asked to help pay it. The commission, furious and terrified, decided revenge must be taken. They ordered Anthony and Victor Amuso to eliminate Gotti and DeCicco, the very men who had hired them months earlier. Anthony didn't hesitate. Loyalty was not emotional, it was business. The plan was brutal, a car bomb, a killing method so dangerous the Mafia had banned it decades ago. Too loud, too messy, too unpredictable. But Anthony followed orders. He planted the bomb in DeCicco's car and walked away like it was just another night in Brooklyn. When Frank opened the car door, boom, a massive explosion ripped the parking lot into fire and metal. DeCicco died instantly. But Gotti? He survived. The legend Gaspipe Casso had failed to kill his target, and that failure began a new chapter, one filled with paranoia, revenge and blood. Anthony didn't talk about that night again. He didn't have to. Everyone already knew. Because from that moment forward, Anthony Casso wasn't just a killer. He became the man who hunted other killers. And New York would never forget his name again. When the bomb that killed Frank DeCicco exploded, it didn't just destroy a car. It started a chain of events that would change the Mafia forever. The fire, the smoke, the screaming, it all echoed through the underworld like a warning shot. Everyone was asking the same silent question: who dared explode a bomb in the heart of New York? And behind that question stood two names whispered in dark corners: Amuso and Casso. After the failed assassination attempt on Gotti, the streets grew tense. Every Mafia meeting from Staten Island to Brooklyn took place behind bulletproof glass and armed guards. Trust had evaporated completely. From that moment forward, Anthony understood something extremely valuable. Violence was changing. The Mafia was evolving, and if he didn't evolve with it, he would become just another dead soldier lying in an unmarked grave. When Anthony returned to the Lucchese headquarters, no one questioned him. They didn't dare. The way he handled himself after a failed assassination told everyone one thing: Gaspipe Casso felt nothing. Not regret, not fear, not hesitation. Victor Amuso watched him closely. He recognized something dangerous in Anthony. A man who could kill a Mafia boss without blinking could also overthrow his own leader one day. But Amuso wasn't frightened. He was impressed, and more importantly, he needed Anthony. Bosshood within the Mafia wasn't earned by patience. It was earned in shadows, blood, and betrayal. So Amuso and Casso made a silent pact. If one climbed, the other climbed with him. They were no longer partners. They were a future regime. The commission trial, meanwhile, the law had been quietly plotting something bigger. The FBI had been studying the five families, collecting tiny pieces of evidence, hiring translators for Italian wiretaps, and slowly building a legal bomb more powerful than anything Anthony could plant. The Mafia Commission trial began tearing down entire Mafia leadership structures. Bosses of all 5 families were being indicted. Courtrooms became battlefields. Judges sentenced men who once controlled cities like they were nothing more than common criminals. And somewhere in that chaos, an opportunity appeared. Anthony and Victor stepped into the vacuum created by these arrests. With bosses imprisoned and ranks broken, someone had to lead the Lucchese family. Someone ruthless. Someone capable of violence at a level no one could match. Anthony and Victor were the obvious answer. The transition wasn't dramatic. There was no coronation, no celebration, not in the Mafia world. Leadership moved through whispers. One day, Anthony woke up a certified killer. The next day, he woke up the most dangerous man in the Lucchese family after Amuso. There were new rules now. Rules of survival, not honor. Rules written in fear, not tradition. The FBI wasn't just chasing mobsters anymore. They were chasing an entire system. And Anthony had spent his entire life learning how to slip between systems. Anthony earned a terrifying identity, the kind of identity that didn't need introduction. Cops who handled organized crime investigations genuinely believed Anthony took pleasure in murder, not as a job, not as punishment, but as a personal experience. Newspapers couldn't print his name openly. Journalists referred to him with nicknames. Rumors circulated constantly. He shoots people to test himself. He kills without emotion. He enjoys watching them bleed. Some of those stories were exaggerated, but most of them weren't. Soon, casino owners, construction unions, trucking businesses, even international smugglers were paying tribute to Gaspipe. Fear spread across Brooklyn like a plague. You didn't need to meet Anthony to fear him. Just hearing his name was enough. Children heard stories of him while their parents closed windows at night. Women prayed their husbands never crossed paths with him. Even other mobsters lowered their voices when they spoke about him, and Anthony loved every second of it. For him, fear wasn't a tool. Fear was oxygen. After the commission trial shattered the Mafia's leadership structure, Anthony and Victor found themselves holding more power than they had ever imagined. But with power came something else: paranoia. Everyone surrounding them suddenly looked suspicious. Every handshake felt like a threat. Every friendly smile felt like a mask hiding betrayal. The Mafia had always been built on trust, blood oaths, silent promises, mutual loyalty, but the old world was dying fast. Anthony had grown into a different creature, someone who understood that trust was just another weakness, something that could get him killed if he relied on it for too long. So instead, he began ruling through fear. Fear was predictable. Fear didn't betray you. Fear didn't argue. Fear obeyed. At night, Anthony would sit alone in his mansion, lights dim, cigarette glowing, staring through the dark windows at an invisible future. He knew that every powerful mafia boss eventually faced two endings: a prison cell or a coffin, sometimes both. But Anthony had decided long ago he would never accept either. Victor Amuso trusted him completely, but even that trust wasn't enough anymore. The FBI was getting smarter, investigators more aggressive. Undercover agents were infiltrating business unions, construction companies, trucking industries. Every criminal line the Mafia touched was being traced, observed, monitored. And Anthony understood something terrifying. The world was no longer scared of the Mafia, but the Mafia was starting to be scared of the world. Still, Anthony refused to soften. Instead, he grew harsher. Anyone who held even the smallest doubt, anyone who hesitated, anyone who spoke too comfortably around law enforcement, disappeared. Some bodies were found inside cars, some under construction sites, others never found at all. Anthony didn't see people anymore. He saw liabilities, risks, potential informants, and he had a very unique method for dealing with potential threats. He eliminated them before anyone else noticed the danger. A new rule formed inside his mind: if you wait for proof, you're already dead. This mindset turned the Lucchese organization into a machine fueled by blood and silence. Soldiers didn't dare whisper doubts. Captains didn't dare question orders. Even longtime mafia associates began avoiding eye contact with Anthony when they greeted him. And yet, inside all this darkness, something else was quietly forming around him. Something he never expected. Corruption from inside law enforcement. 2 NYPD detectives, heavily trusted in their unit, began secretly working for Anthony. It started small, a piece of information here, a location there. But slowly, those officers crossed the line from cooperating to serving. They told Anthony when the FBI launched a surveillance order. They warned him when arrest warrants were being prepared. They leaked confidential federal documents, and in return, Anthony paid them like royalty. Through these detectives, he gained a level of protection that no mafia boss before him ever imagined. He wasn't just avoiding the law anymore, he was using the law to get rid of enemies. If someone inside the mafia annoyed him, if someone questioned his decisions, if someone showed hesitation, Anthony didn't need to send a hitman anymore. He simply told the police where that man could be found. The FBI thought they were closing in. But the truth was darker. Anthony had already stepped inside their own system, quietly poisoning it. He wasn't just surviving inside the mafia, he was rewriting what mafia power meant. And in the shadows of New York's darkest streets, people had begun whispering another name for him. Gaspipe wasn't enough anymore. Some started calling him something far more frightening. The Butcher. Anthony's reputation didn't just grow, it warped, twisted, and spread like smoke through every neighborhood touched by the mafia. He no longer needed to speak to make himself understood. One look, one quiet visit, or even just the rumor of his presence was enough to make people pay, obey, or disappear somewhere. Along the line, Anthony stopped being a man and became a myth. New recruits entering the Lucchese family heard stories about him before they ever saw him. Dark stories, whispered like urban legends. Stories about how he walked into a room without sound. Stories about how he never raised his voice, yet men twice his size trembled in front of him. But myth is a dangerous thing. It feeds power, but it also feeds ego. And ego in the mafia is poison. Throughout the late 1980s, Anthony's paranoia deepened. The FBI was closing in on major mafia structures everywhere. Every other week, another boss, underboss, or consigliere was taken down by long investigations, hidden wiretaps, or undercover operations that moved like ghosts among the streets. Anthony understood something others didn't. He wasn't just fighting the law anymore, he was fighting time. Old mafia traditions were collapsing, the codes of silence were weakening. Younger mobsters didn't believe in honor, they believed in self-preservation. And the government was offering something irresistible: deals, reduced sentences, witness protection, a new life in exchange for information. Anthony saw this trend like a disease spreading through the families, and he knew exactly what happened to diseased limbs. You cut them off. So he began eliminating anyone he suspected of even thinking about cooperating. He didn't wait for proof, he didn't need evidence. All he needed was a feeling, a suspicion, a whisper from someone he trusted. In those years, men died without ever knowing why. Some were found in trunks, hands tied, mouths stuffed with feathers as a message. Sing and you'll die. Others vanished entirely. No body, no grave, no story. Brooklyn learned that disappearing was a lot worse than dying because a family could mourn a death, but disappearance was an open wound that never healed. Yet strangely, while Anthony was busy destroying the mafia's enemies, the mafia itself was slowly collapsing from inside. Victor Amuso, his lifelong partner in crime, began questioning Anthony's methods, not because he disagreed, but because Anthony had become unpredictable, dangerous even for his own allies. When Victor hesitated, Anthony didn't blink. He simply took more control, decision by decision, hit by hit, fear by fear. Anthony began acting like the true boss of the Lucchese family without ever officially being crowned. Behind every dark alley, behind every business deal, behind every envelope of protection money, Anthony was watching. And the FBI, they weren't watching him enough. Federal agents chasing organized crime were trained to look for patterns, routines, meetings, or recorded conversations. But Anthony didn't follow patterns. He didn't hold meetings. He didn't leave fingerprints. He didn't trust phones, restaurants, or even private rooms in his own home. If he needed to deliver an order, he said one sentence in one location, then never repeated it again. The FBI began calling him the Phantom, a criminal mastermind who seemed to exist everywhere and nowhere at the same time. But soon, all that silence was going to break, and the man who thought he controlled every shadow was about to learn what real darkness looked like, because no matter how powerful the Mafia was, the United States government was bigger, smarter, more patient, and Anthony Casso was about to face something he could not control. Something that would change the fate of the Mafia forever. Anthony always believed fear was stronger than loyalty. Loyalty could be broken by money, pressure, or prison. But fear lived inside a man, even after years, even after a friendship ended. So Anthony built an empire based on fear. But fear has a weakness. It makes enemies quiet until they explode. Throughout the early 1990s, New York was changing. The old Mafia neighborhoods weren't controlled the way they once were. Street gangs, foreign cartels, drug rings, everyone wanted a piece of the criminal world. And unlike the Mafia, these new players weren't afraid of tradition or hierarchy. Police pressure increased. Wiretaps got smarter. Surveillance became invisible, and agents didn't just chase crimes, they chased conversations. One wrong word, recorded at the wrong time, could take down an entire Mafia family. Anthony realized this and started cutting off communication, sometimes literally. If someone talked too much, he made sure they would never talk again. The Lucchese family had always been violent, but under Anthony, violence became a routine. Most hits weren't dramatic, they were quick, silent, and forgotten. A body here, a missing man there. But violence attracts attention, and attention attracts the law. The turning point came when one of Anthony's trusted men survived an attempt on his life, an attempt ordered by Anthony himself. The survivor, full of anger and betrayal, went straight to the government. For the FBI, it was like receiving a gift wrapped in gold. Suddenly, they had names, connections, stories, locations, all leading to one man, Anthony Gaspipe Casso. He wasn't the only target, but he was the biggest. And then something happened that Anthony never predicted. His enemies weren't just outside anymore, they were inside. While the FBI hunted him, something even worse was happening behind closed Mafia doors. His own people began discussing removing him, replacing him, killing him. Anthony had spent decades eliminating potential traitors, but now the traitor was invisible. Someone close, someone protected, someone important. He knew what was coming, so he did the one thing he had avoided his whole life. He ran. Not for power, not for money, for survival. The man who once controlled the most feared criminal network in America was now hiding like a fugitive, moving from safe house to safe house, sleeping with a gun under his pillow, trusting no one, not even the people who swore loyalty to him. Because in the Mafia, loyalty ends the moment you become a burden. And Anthony Casso had just become the biggest burden the Lucchese family ever carried. The walls were closing, the FBI was watching, his friends were turning, and for the first time in his life, Anthony was afraid. For months, Anthony lived like a shadow. No phones, no routine, no familiar faces. He changed houses as often as other people changed clothes. Cheap motels, hidden apartments, sometimes the homes of mistresses who didn't dare ask questions. Every night was the same ritual. Lock the doors, load the weapon, stare at the ceiling waiting for footsteps that never came. He still controlled soldiers, money, rackets, but now everything felt distant, like he was controlling his empire from underwater. The power that once felt like steel now felt like sand slipping through his fingers. The FBI wasn't knocking yet, but Anthony could feel them breathing. And then the worst thing imaginable happened. Someone close betrayed him. Not a street soldier, not an outsider, a man he once trusted with secrets, operations, and violence. Someone he'd considered unbeatable. Someone who had eaten at his table, kissed his wife's cheek, and sworn loyalty by blood. That man flipped, and suddenly the government knew everything. Names, businesses, murders, and the exact structure of the Lucchese crime family. Each time Anthony moved to a new hiding place, the police seemed to appear a little closer. Sometimes a black sedan slowed near the street. Sometimes a new face appeared in the neighborhood. He couldn't tell anymore. Were those FBI agents or mafia assassins? Both wanted him dead. Both were searching. Inside the criminal world, Anthony became a ghost story. Spoken about, feared, but never seen. Rumors spread fast. He's losing his mind. He sleeps with a rifle. He trusts no one now. One rumor even claimed he shaved his mustache and dyed his hair just to walk outside without being recognized. Only one person consistently stayed in his life, his longtime mistress, the woman who was loyal even when his own wife lost trust. She became his only human contact, his only safe room, his last island in a storm where the waves were getting higher every night. And then, one morning just before sunrise, FBI tactical units silently surrounded the house where he was hiding. No gunfight, no dramatic standoff, no last stand. Anthony Casso, the butcher of Brooklyn, the feared underboss of the Lucchese family, was arrested while stepping out of the shower, still dripping water, still believing nobody could catch him. After decades of violence, after dozens of murders, after building an empire on fear, a single knock on the bathroom door ended everything. That moment wasn't just the end of a career, it was the beginning of the most shocking betrayal the mafia world had ever seen. Inside custody, Anthony didn't panic, not at first. Most mobsters feared prison more than death, but Anthony believed he could still play the game. He still had friends on the outside, he still had soldiers, he still had money. He still believed loyalty existed. He thought the mafia would protect him the same way he had protected them, that all the murders he'd ordered, all the fear he created, all the power he gave the Lucchese family would somehow come back to save him. But prison walls make truths louder. The minute he arrived, he felt it. Something inside the mafia world had shifted. Men who once feared saying his name now whispered it without hesitation. Other family members were cutting deals. Some were already cooperating. Some were preparing testimony. Suddenly, Anthony realized the most terrifying truth of his life. Everybody was choosing survival over loyalty. His partner, Victor Amuso, the man he trusted for nearly 2 decades, was already blaming everything on Anthony, painting him as the mastermind, the violent one, the real monster, hoping prosecutors would go easier on himself. When Anthony heard this, something inside him snapped. For the first time in his life, he felt truly alone. The mafia code, the brotherhood, the honor, they were illusions. Powerful illusions, yes, but illusions nonetheless. He reviewed every crime, every murder, every risk he'd ever taken, and suddenly all of it felt pointless. But he wasn't done. Not yet. He still tried to run the family from inside jail, whispering messages through lawyers and relatives. He still ordered business. He still believed he could escape. He even planned a daring breakout, bribing a guard, arranging timing, memorizing routes. But at the last second, another officer walked by, noticed the tension, and ruined everything. That moment changed him. The fear he used to inspire had evaporated. Now he was just another criminal locked inside a small concrete box. There was only one card left to play. The card he once swore he'd rather die than touch. Anthony Casso, the butcher, the executioner, the feared underboss, requested a meeting with federal agents. Not to fight them, not to threaten them, but to talk. When Anthony first sat across from federal agents, there was no fear in his eyes, only a strange exhaustion. Years of killing, plotting, and surviving had finally taken something from him. He didn't start confessing immediately. First, he wanted something in return. He wanted safety. He wanted protection. More than anything, he wanted revenge on the same mafia world that had abandoned him the moment trouble arrived. The agents expected arrogance, denial, and excuses, but instead they found a man who was absolutely certain of every crime he had ever planned. Anthony did not hesitate when listing names. His memory was horrifyingly sharp. He remembered every bullet, every location, every victim, every single betrayal, even crimes no one ever connected to the Lucchese family. He talked about murders casually, the way normal people talk about errands. He admitted things the agents didn't even know existed. But as the confession sessions continued, something else surfaced. Anthony wasn't just exposing his enemies, he was exposing himself more than anyone realized. He admitted to dozens of murders, including ones he didn't need to confess. He named corrupt police officers who had secretly worked for him for years, lawmen who kidnapped targets, delivered victims, and even helped bury bodies. He detailed how deep corruption was inside New York City, revealing a shadow world where criminals wore badges and justice was negotiable. He wasn't telling stories, he was describing the hidden skeleton of American organized crime. At night, locked inside his cell again, something unexpected happened. He started losing sleep, not because of guilt, but because the power he once controlled was now slipping into the hands of prosecutors, lawyers, and judges. He wasn't feared anymore, he wasn't respected, and most importantly, he wasn't in charge. That reality tore deeper than every bullet wound he ever survived. Yet he pushed forward. Every new confession damaged another mafia family. Every name he revealed removed decades of silence. The FBI realized they weren't just interviewing a gangster. They were listening to a walking history book of organized crime. What Anthony carried in his memories was worth more than every case file combined. But there was one thing Anthony didn't expect. The FBI didn't fully trust him either. He was too violent, too unpredictable, too dangerous to be treated like any other witness. They feared letting him testify, for fear juries would reject anything coming from a man who openly enjoyed killing. Anthony sensed this, and the fear he had never admitted began growing quietly inside him. Not fear of dying, but fear of becoming irrelevant. For a man who once controlled Brooklyn with blood and fear, irrelevance was the cruelest punishment imaginable. Anthony stayed in the cooperation program for months, and every meeting pushed him deeper into memories he had never spoken about. He described the taste of fear in his victims' voices, the smell of gunpowder inside small rooms, and how the silence after a killing felt more comforting than the noise before it. Federal agents sometimes sat speechless, unable to understand how a human being could talk about death like it was just part of daily business. What shocked them most was that Anthony never blamed anyone else. He didn't say, "I had no choice." He didn't say, "They forced me." He said things like, "That guy needed to go," or "I enjoyed that one." Words that felt heavier than any confession written on paper. But slowly the agents noticed something unusual. Whenever Anthony spoke about his power, his voice carried excitement. Whenever he talked about being locked up, his voice sounded more tired. It became clear to investigators that Anthony didn't regret killing. He regretted losing control. He wasn't a monster who suddenly found morality. He was a monster who no longer had a kingdom. They used him, but they never trusted him. The FBI even started questioning whether he was intentionally trying to manipulate investigations, perhaps steering them against certain mobsters while protecting others he secretly favored. Outside, the mafia world realized what was happening. Newspapers started reporting secret testimony given by an unnamed high-ranking mobster. Street whispers in Brooklyn said the butcher had turned rat. Mobsters who once feared Anthony now spit on his name. But inside the federal room, Anthony didn't care about honor anymore. Honor had abandoned him first. Mafia loyalty meant nothing when the same mafia tried to erase him forever. Still, there was one truth he could not escape. Every name he exposed, every murder he described, every criminal operation he explained, none of it would erase the fact that he was now the very thing he executed others for being, an informant. Late one night, when guards walked past his cell, they saw him staring at the wall with a strange expression. Not sadness, not anger, but a strange loneliness. For the first time in decades, Anthony had no soldiers, no allies, no power, and no control. He wasn't feared like a boss or respected like a killer. He was simply a criminal trapped by years of violence he himself created. And yet, he wasn't done. He still had more to confess, more secrets, more names, more crimes that could destroy everything the Mafia built for decades. The most devastating revelations were still ahead. Inside the interrogation room, Anthony's cooperation began exposing shocking truths that federal investigators had never imagined possible. He didn't only describe murders, he exposed a hidden network of police corruption, revealing how certain officers deliberately worked for the mob. He explained how confidential federal information leaked for years and how evidence simply vanished whenever the Mafia needed protection. Agents listened like they were watching history become rewired. Every claim he made implied the same unanswered question: how much of New York's justice system had secretly belonged to the Mafia? One night, Anthony admitted something darker. The killings weren't always business. Sometimes he ordered murders simply because someone irritated him, disrespected him, or looked at him the wrong way. A wrong glance could be considered betrayal, and betrayal could be answered with death. Federal prosecutors began realizing Anthony wasn't simply a criminal caught by law. He was a man who had become addicted to violence. He didn't kill for survival. He killed because power tasted better when someone else feared you. That realization made prosecutors deeply uncomfortable. In private conversations, some federal agents argued that Casso was too evil to testify publicly. Putting him on the witness stand could damage the prosecution instead of strengthening it, because juries might simply feel sick listening to him talk. Even the system trying to use him started fearing him. Inside prison, Anthony tried to adjust to being just another inmate, but his past followed him everywhere. Other prisoners whispered his name like a ghost from another era. Some respected him, some wanted revenge. No one dared approach him directly, and yet, isolated from the world he once controlled, Anthony finally experienced something he had never faced before: time. Endless hours with nothing but thoughts. He replayed murders, betrayals, the faces of men he executed, and the blood he left behind like signatures. He knew he could not escape decades of violence, yet he also refused to regret them. Regret requires conscience, and Anthony had killed his conscience long before the law captured his body. What haunted him most was not what he did, but what he lost: power, fear, control. Outside the prison walls, the Mafia reorganized itself, learned from his downfall, and evolved without him. In the underworld, once you stop being useful, your story ends immediately. The legend of Gaspipe began fading like cigarette smoke, drifting out of a broken window. For the first time, Anthony wasn't part of the Mafia story. He was just a chapter they wanted to forget. As years passed, Anthony remained locked away, aging inside concrete walls designed to erase men like him. He tried appealing, negotiating, searching for loopholes, but nothing changed his reality. His career ended long before his life did. In his final years, Anthony Casso became nothing more than a historical shadow, the butcher who had once commanded fear, now forgotten even by the system that feared him. His brutal legacy continued only through criminal files, documentaries, and whispered Mafia legends. When death finally approached, he faced it alone, far from Brooklyn streets, far from Mafia circles, and far from any respect he once demanded. No funeral crowd, no mafia salute, no legacy of honor. History remembers him not as a leader, not as a kingpin, but as one of the most violent monsters the mafia ever produced, and the informant who betrayed his own criminal kingdom. His story ends not with glory, but with silence, a silence deeper than any grave. The life and death of Anthony Gaspipe Casso, a warning carved into history.